In the time before time, two great titans were locked in a timeless battle, until at last, only their corpses remained. The story I just told was not the beginning of Xenoblade Chronicles, but the ending of Biological Chronicle, or as most of you know it, Bionicle. I want to look at two of my favorite stories of all time, Legend of the Bionicle and Xeno. We're going to be taking a look at how similar these stories are, and how a strange convergent evolution took place leading to these epics. There is something I want to make clear. While there are a ton of similarities, that's about it. The reason is due to their subject matter. They are both science fiction stories about transhumanism philosophies, dealing with technology evolving with humanity and AI-powered life. Before we start, I'm going to be spoiling everything about both series. Most importantly, all of the Xeno games. Those include Xenogears, the Xenosaga trilogy, and the Xenoblade trilogy. Before I lose any of you, I feel I need to lay the groundwork for Xeno as a whole. This franchise is the brainchild of Tetsuya Takahashi. Xeno is more of a meta term due to the use of the term Xeno as a prefix in all of the titles of each series. The Xeno series follows an episodic formula that was first mentioned in the book Xenogears Perfect Works, but I think it's better to describe it in a 3-act structure. The first act of the story is mankind in space. The second act follows life created by the Demiurge. Finally, the third act is what comes after. Due to many developmental issues, the series has both changed course and kept the core of the story fairly well. The best example is how Xenoblade 3 is a remake of the first game Xenogears. It's a remake that cuts off the fat and keeps the core of the original story while also adding in new stuff too. The best thing I can do is recommend playing these games. They have some of the greatest stories in all of fiction. If you're a Bionicle fan, this story will speak to you, because I know it did to me. Please play these games before watching this video. I will be spoiling everything. But when you're done playing the greatest games of all time, head over to my friend Xenobits' channel. He's doing a massive timeline on the entirety of the series. Now for all the Xeno fans in the audience. If you know nothing of the story of Bionicle, I recommend reading all the books. I'll have a link in the description for that. I feel the best place to start off is with the opening cutscene of Xenogears. There is an analogous event in Bionicle that has a similar rule to the opening, even if not placed in a similar area. In summary, a gigantic spaceship is carrying the survivors from the destruction of planet Mictum 04 Beta. But Deus, an interplanetary invasion system, attempts to hijack the ship to go to Lost Jerusalem, or as we know it, Earth. Earth is lost in the Xeno series and is a major part of the story. It's unknown why Deus wanted to go to Earth, but it was most likely to be explored in the never-made episode 6. The captain caused the ship to self-destruct to not let Deus escape to Earth, causing the ship and Deus to fall to the planet below, where civilization starts anew. Deus manipulates this new society born of a supercomputer to be its components, for when the time comes to further its metamorphosis and take to the stars for the next 9,999 years. Deus is very interesting in regards to this topic. It is a biomechanical being. The best way to describe it is if a mecha mangaka created Cell from Dragon Ball, which actually isn't too far off when you realize Xenogears was once a Chrono game in development. Deus functions similar to Lavos from Chrono Trigger as a cosmic being that has its own goals, but never speaks directly to the player. Lavos being the JRPG version of Cell, everything starts to make sense. It's an unholy fusion of biology and technology. The horror of giving a weapon AI and the power of God too. The opening of Xenogears is the equivalent of the Great Cataclysm in Bionicle, where the Makuta used a virus to put Madnui, the Great Spirit Robot, to sleep, causing him to crash onto Aqua Magna, where the Toa Metru fled from the city of Metronui, with all the Matoran in stasis to start a civilization anew on the island of Madnui. Makuta Pterodax would bide his time for 1,000 years, creating the ultimate plan to take over the Matoran universe, a plan so grand it made one of the greatest villains in fiction. They are both inciting events that are so far flung removed they don't even feel like inciting events. In Xenogears, while you see it every time you start up the game, it's not relevant until like 50 hours later. While for Bionicle, it's the grand explanation of why these little robot guys are on some random island. Even at that, we didn't know about the Great Spirit Robot crashing until 2008, give or take. Well, at least the full story of the Great Cataclysm. The 2004 storyline is about the event from the perspective of the Toa Metru. Now let's look at it in the simplest of terms. A rogue being takes over a spaceship in a plot to hijack it. The vessel ends up crashing on a planet that it's over, where civilization has to start over from the remnants of the crash. But the rogue being is still alive and spends thousands of years waiting for their ultimate plan to be complete as they manipulate the new civilization to their advantage. When putting it in those terms, it all becomes clear. Now, obviously, there is more depth to the story than just the simplistic plot description. This inciting event isn't even the most obvious when everything is boiled down. There are more glaring similarities. The setting of the first Xenoblade game and the first 8 years of Bionicle are really similar. Maybe not at a first glance, but the more we deep dive, the clearer everything becomes. The first thing we see in Xenoblade 1 is two titans, locked in combat until only their corpses remain. Cut to the events of the game and civilization is thriving on the Bionis, the main setting of the game. For Bionicle, the plan was the main setting was always going to be the Great Spirit Robot. This revelation wasn't revealed until 2008, but the seeds were planted long before, with the layer of impenetrable metal in Onukoro, and the Bohrok needing to clean. From Metronui onwards, everything mostly takes place inside the Great Spirit Robot, so the story revolves around the concept of living in or on a titanic being. I feel this is best explained by Zanza's line about the life of the Bionis being cells.
The Homs are nothing but bacteria, clinging to my body.
They are living beings. If you cannot understand this, you have no right to call yourself a god.
And Madnui's opening speech from the Legend Reborn, which would be a really good segue to the next part of the video. But before that, there is another LEGO property we need to talk about. Xenoblade 1 is remarkably similar to LEGO Exoforce. The concept is humans battling evil robots using mecha. The setting is represented by a split mountain with bridges connecting them where the battles are held. One is organic while the other is completely mechanical. This should sound extremely similar to Xenoblade 1, with the Bionis and Mechanis frozen with the only thing connecting them a sword that acts as a bridge. The conflict setup and setting is really similar. Naturally, the story goes in different ways. Xenoblade is more of a fantasy story with mecha elements, while Exoforce is more of a generic take on the real robot genre of mecha, but with a LEGO twist to it. Where I believe these similarities to Bionicle is sheer coincidence based off the themings of the stories, there is a chance Tetsuya Takahashi knows what Exoforce is. It's not a high percentage, but there is a good chance. Takahashi is a known mecha enthusiast. His son calls him a Gundam otaku. Famously, during the development of Xenogears, his work desk had a ton of Gundam model kits. Xenogears is filled to the brim with references to mecha. One of the best examples is Maria Balthazar, clearly being a gender-swapped Daisaku Kusama, and her gear being inspired by the 1992 OVA version of Giant Robo, with the gear changing out the Egyptian motif for a Roman legionary. But the main example is the late-game gear, Superdimensional Gear Yggdrasil 4. This is an overt reference to Superdimensional Fortress Macross. Shoji Kawamori is the creator of Macross. While doing the story, he also did the mechanical designs and even the toy designs too. He is also the original designer of Optimus Prime from back when it was Battle Convoy in Diaclone. In 2006, the LEGO Group commissioned him to create combiner models for promotional use in Japan. Also in 2006, the idea for Xenoblade was sparked in the mind of Tetsuya Takahashi. While it is possible Tetsuya Takahashi may have seen Exoforce, I also find it incredibly unlikely. But it is a very small possibility that Exoforce may have been an inspiration for the setting of Xenoblade. The Xeno series is known for taking inspiration from every form of sci-fi and the mecha genre at large. Xenoblade started development in 2006, and Exoforce was first released in 2006. Everything just lines up to me. Even if he wasn't a fan of it, he still could have taken certain inspirations. But until something is confirmed, it will stay in the very unlikely area of speculation. Manui and Zanza are perfect mirrors to each other. It's truly fascinating how they are the exact opposite, and yet the same concept. Matanui is an AI god learning to be human, and that the beings that are his cells are his people and should be cherished. So much so, he sacrifices his own life so they may live on. Zanza is a megalomaniac human scientist that loses his humanity due to believing he is an all-powerful god, and that his creations are pitiful food that he can use to live for eternity, eventually falling to his creations that reject the notion of God when offered the chance to become gods themselves. And yet both are souls that control a giant body that their people live in or on. Their stories parallel each other so much it's fascinating. And now I will admit, in Zanza's case, I'm not entirely telling the truth. Because, well, Zanza is one side of a coin. He is a part of the scientist Klaus, or as he is known in the world of Allrest, the Architect. At some unspecified point in the 21st century, Klaus was a scientist on the space elevator Radamanthus, where he studied the Zohar, a monolith that can be seen as a doorway to a higher plane of existence, or even to God. The orbital ring the elevator led to was controlled by the Earth Coalition government, a new world order that didn't care too much for human rights. This would lead to a war with the Salvatore faction, otherwise known as the Saviorites in the English version of the game. This caused a last stand in an attempt to seize control of the Zohar, where Klaus would lock everyone out of the room that the Zohar was in except for another scientist named Galea. The universe of the Bionis and Mechanis were born, and the Earth was hidden by other shadowy government officials that had already colonized the stars. Klaus, the last living being on Earth, set to reseed life, which he did leading to the events of Xenoblade 2. Part of Klaus became the soul of the Bionis, or as he's also known, Zanza, and Galea's soul became that of the Mechanis, as her physical body on Earth became that of the Infernal Guldo. I find this point works better when looking at Xenoblade 1 in a vacuum, but the caveat is that Xenoblade 1 wasn't even designed to be a Xeno game originally, but a standalone title. The second game just retcons this element. I normally don't like looking at things in a vacuum, however Xenoblade 1 is a special case, where certain design choices need to be looked at in a vacuum compared to the whole of Xeno. Xenoblade 1 also has the strangest case of a parallel to Bionicle. It's the Bohrok, and the Telethia. First, what is a Bohrok? They are insectoid or reptilian depending on who you ask, hive mind machines that must clean off the Madanui robot's camouflage. In this case, that means wiping out the island of Madanui. They come in multiple types to coincide with the main core elements of Bionicle: fire, water, air, ice, earth, and stone. What is a Telethia? They are cell-like dragons or birds. The Nopon call them dino beasts. They exist to serve the Bionis itself in a singular hive mind to wipe out life so it can become food for the Bionis. Telethia also come in multiple types based on their body type: Sani, Phoenix, Lycorn, Dracos, Gygas, and Havrai. Now, what I've already described is pretty similar, but there is one key factor that solidifies this parallel: the fact that they were both once people. Bohrok were once of Matoran, and Telethia were once pure-blood Hyentia, both reduced to possible mindless beings of a hive mind that must destroy for a higher power and control. But there is a slight difference, with Madanui being the hero and Zanza being the villain. The Bohrok were initially seen as evil because they were awakened unnaturally by Makuta Pterodax. The cleaning of the Great Spirit robot was necessary, but the time to do it was not then. Everything about the Telethia is seen as awful in Xenoblade. They drain ether, the building block of life, from organisms on the Bionis, and thus destruction is seen in their wake. One of the first Telethia seen in the game is in a lively forest, except it's in a dead part of the forest, and it's all because of the Telethia. Even in the last act of the game, they become the main threat due to their connection to Zanza and the Bionis itself. It's fascinating how close in concept the Bohrok and Telethia are, a hive mind that must destroy life on the outside of a gargantuan being, and yet both go about it in different ways, creating a unique parallel to both stories. For this comparison, I'd like to go to Xenosaga, because we're looking at Realians. I know what you're all asking. What's a Xenosaga? Xenosaga was the second attempt at Takahashi's story. The trilogy follows the Mankind in Space arc. If Xenogears is closer to something like Dune, Xenosaga is closer to Foundation. Now you're asking what a Realian is. They are synthetic beings. Their chemical makeup can be silicon or liquid metal, but the most important is carbon-based. The best way to describe them is biorobots, a true fusion of biology and nanotech engineering. The use of the word biorobot is very important in this context, not to be confused with designer children, because they can be programmed and are legally considered equipment. In a cruel twist of fate, they have emotions thanks to their artificial personality layer. This allows them to interface with humans. Their personality depends on the type of job and their appearance. Matoran are biomechanical beings that are 85% mechanical, the rest is all organic. It's all muscle and tissue, hence why they are actually cyborgs. Velika was a great being responsible for the sentience of the Matorans as a species, choosing to go with them and watch them, disguised as a Matoran in the Great Spirit robot. Matorans and Realians are both artificial beings that were given emotions and sentience. A theme in both stories is how, if they can think and have emotions, then are they people? This is the core of transhumanism. It's that sense of using technology to evolve beyond traditional biological constraints. It's best represented in creating biological robots and cyborgs with their own thoughts and emotions. Are they equipment, or are they people? That is the big question when it comes to the story of the Matorans and the Realians. These stories may have not been fleshed out as much as the writers envisioned. Greg Farshty, the lead writer of Bionicle, never got to tell the tale of these questions in the aftermath of Spherus Magna. Takahashi's original vision may have been about a Realian breakaway civilization on another planet. That would have ultimately been the remake of Xenogears envisioned from the start. Even if we never got the full conclusions to these stories, the intent was still there about if artificial beings are indeed people, as well as other aspects of transhumanist philosophy. Bionicle and Xeno are about mending broken worlds, destroyed by the greed of power that wars were waged over, that led to the ultimate destruction of the world, and the fleeing of its people. The Zohar and energized Protodermis are analogous to each other, both being fought over and ultimately destroying their worlds. Bionicle had the core war over the substance that led to the shattering. Likewise, Xeno had the Salvatore faction wage war in the coalition government after their human rights bill was turned down, causing them to attempt to seize control of the Zohar. This caused Klaus to use its power in the heat of conflict for his experiment to create a new universe. Energized Protodermis and the Zohar in all reality are nothing alike from a conceptual level. One is a sapient substance, the other is considered a gateway to higher dimensions. But what I find fascinating is the story connection in how the discovery and ensuing war over the substance is the ultimate inciting incident to the entire story. Without them, there is no story. No world to be fused and no hero to go on an epic quest to ultimately have to fuse them back together, even if that was never their plan to begin with. But remember how I described energized Protodermis as a sapient being? Yeah, it has the ability to think. I find it similar to how the Zohar is utilized in Xenogears. It is a prison for the wave existence, a higher dimensional being. It was trapped due to a Zohar experiment done on Deus. The way the energized Protodermis described itself to Helryx is similar to the wave existence's conversation with Faye. They are both clearly godlike beings in their own world. Compared to the Bohrok and Telethia connection, I find you have to look at this from a storytelling standpoint. It's at least not a strong point like that. In a strange way, both narratives are about the refusing of the Promised Land. Bionicle has Spherus Magna, and Xeno has Lost Jerusalem. The Great Spirit robot was always going to be the setting of Bionicle, but the big question becomes, why was a robot that large even created? Well, it was created to carry the Great Spirit of the world of Spherus Magna. That's why the body is filled with islands and has an abundance of nature, while also being inside a mechanical being. The Madanui robot was sent into space for 100,000 years to study other worlds to avoid future conflicts. After that was done, it would return to the shell of the planet Bara Magna, where it would be fused with Boda Magna and Aqua Magna. Then Makuta Pterodax caused it to crash on Aqua Magna, but it would awaken once more as the gears of destiny turned. But Pterodax wanted this to happen so he could take control of the robot in his ultimate grand plan. Pterodax sent Madanui out of his own body in the Ignika, the Mask of Life, where he landed on Bara Magna. Eventually, Madanui would rebuild the prototype robot to take down Makuta and fuse the worlds at the cost of his own life. When it comes to Xeno, the plot of Lost Jerusalem is always lurking in the background, only ever coming up at the end of games and story arcs to remind players these stakes at hand. In the opening cutscene of Xenogears, it's stated that Deus wants to go to Lost Jerusalem.
We can't stop them. 98% of our weapons have been taken over.
The autopilot system Faust has been accessed, and its phase space logic is being rewritten. Ergo area is increasing. An internal plane is forming. Switching to space displacement mode.
Alpha 1, confirming transfer of coordinate codes. Coordinates input, coordinate NX128, EZ061, the main planet.
Damn, so they're planning on attacking.
Where the cutscene is non-specific about the planet, Perfect Works confirms it. Xenogears is very non-specific when it comes to the grander story. Certain elements like Earth and the time of the Gospel are alluded to, but they were never expanded upon. Where Gears alluded to, Saga made it an explicit part of the story and part of the grander mysteries. Earth is lost, and in-universe there are theories that the main villain Wilhelm sealed the planet off from the wider universe. Eventually, at the end of the trilogy, we find out Wilhelm's true goal is to reset the universe in the eternal recurrence. He does this to stop the collapse of the collective unconsciousness, from people who reject joining it after death. The result is in the Gnosis problem throughout the trilogy. Our heroes reject the eternal recurrence and seek out another way to stop the collapse of the universe. Chaos, a being that has existed for thousands of years, tells the rest of the party that the key to saving the universe is in the Land of Origin, or Lost Jerusalem. The final shot of the game is the character Cosmos floating in the vacuum of space towards Earth, as we await the day for this promise to be fulfilled as Cosmos sleeps. Then finally we reach the Xenoblade trilogy, where Earth is at its most important. In Xenoblade 1, we find out that the Earth is the previous world to the world of the Bionis and Mechonis. Xenoblade 2 expands upon this, showing the hollow shell that remained, and the new life that sprouted in the world now known as Ulrest. We learn that parts of the original world were flung to other dimensions in the experiment that split the worlds in the first place. It's more or less a retcon for Xenoblade 1 to be in existence. It's also heavily implied that both Xenoblade 1 and 2 take place at least in a pocket dimension. I have theories based on the cosmology of Saga on how and where the worlds are. At the end of Xenoblade 1, Shulk recreates the universe in a similar manner to that of our own universe, taking it from being an endless ocean to there really being stars in the sky. However, this event has ramifications. The worlds from 1 and 2 start merging in the events of Xenoblade 3. If something is not done, both worlds will be destroyed. It's like matter meeting antimatter. The most brilliant minds of both worlds create Origin, a device that holds the spirits of the people, and to rebuild everything after the destruction of their worlds. This plan failed. Instead, the worlds were frozen by Mobius and their leader Zed. They are the manifestations of fear of the future, in a way, the next logical evolution of the Gnosis. When the heroes defeat Zed, the world is set back into motion, and the worlds combine, going into real space once more, where a light falls from the sky, to possibly finally usher in the time of the gospel. Origin itself is similar to the Great Spirit robot. It's even a robot itself. They both hold the spirit of the old world and must fuse the pieces together to create a new world. While Matanui as a character is analogous to Zanza, the Great Spirit robot is a overall better fit when it comes to Origin in the function of the story. It also helps that Mobius and Zed are similar, or at least fit a similar role to the Makuta species and Pterodax. Having the villain control a robot built to save the world by fusing planets together is the simplest way to describe that comparison. Both stories at the moment conclude on the worlds fusing, ushering in a new world of limitless stories to be told. At the very worst, ending on a satisfying conclusion of at least one grand story arc. Bionicle and Xenoblade are very similar as they are both about transhumanist philosophies. They are both about the questions of life when it comes to the cells of the body and whether or not AI is alive. I find Bionicle and Xeno to be the most comparable to each other. While I have always compared Bionicle and Ninjago, I find Ninjago lacks a certain level of depth and maturity that Bionicle had. You can bring up the Oni trilogy all you want, but it was still missing that grandiose scale that was found in the best equivalent in Bionicle's Ignition trilogy. Bionicle had me craving worlds that fused fantasy and science. I found Xenoblade filled that Bionicle-shaped void in my soul. Also, Gundam and the plastic model kits filled that buildable robot hole, but that's a story for another day. They are both different takes on the same premise, made by different people across the world, creating a truly timeless chronicle. If you watched all the way to the end, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. There is a lot coming down the pipeline that I think you will find enjoyable. I'm Paleozoic Bricks, and stand tall and shake the heavens.